Good day and welcome to the Auxillary Services Back to School video series. My name is Scott Denton and I'll be your host. Our goal is to provide information that will ensure a smooth start to our school year for the 2017-18 year. Thank you so much for joining us. There's much to discuss, so let's get started. With me today from Transportation is Tammy Phillips, our Northern Transportation Manager. Good morning, Tammy.
Good morning.
So we need to talk about some things for transportation for the upcoming school year, and I guess the biggest challenge for the school year coming up. What would you say is our biggest challenge? What does that challenge mean for our schools, our students, and our parents?
The biggest challenge for the 2017-18 school year unfortunately started in the 2016-17 school year with driver shortages. And what this is going to mean is some of our schools will have double runs, and which means later arrivals at home for our parents and students. So obtaining your CDL has become a little more difficult, so that is a challenge for us in hiring our drivers.
So I think it's important for our audience to understand our recruiting efforts for our drivers and the fact that the economy has a very profound impact on the availability of school bus drivers. The job, as most everybody knows, is a split job where people report to work at 5:30 in the morning and they drive for 3 or 4 hours and then they're off until 1:30 in the afternoon. And they have to come back to work, and that's the problematic in of itself in attracting people. And I think that when the economy is really good and the folks get benefits, they work 12 months a year, they have things that attract them for 8 hours a day, then it makes it much easier to go to another profession. And so I say that because I want our audience to understand that we are doing all we can to recruit and retain our school bus drivers, but it has become a really challenging situation for transportation. The double routes, we finished the year with a number of double routes, and we don't see that resolving itself during the summertime. We believe that the double routes will continue in the next school year. In fact, we're scheduling those for next school year, and that's going to be a really profound impact on our schools. And I don't like double routes any more than anybody else, and I know that you all in operations don't like it either. But at the same time, they're necessary to make it possible for our kids to get to school. Talk about the seatbelt implementation program. We do have some buses coming with seatbelts.
We do, and we will be meeting with the school APs and principals through the summer. We're going to be using those buses with the schools that we receive the most discipline conduct forms on. And in doing that, the schools will be trained as well as the students at the beginning of the school year in hopes that will take care of some of the discipline issues and being suspended off the bus.
Of course, seatbelts have always been a controversial subject. Basically, the seatbelts are for safety on buses, and
Correct.
Most parents and even our administrators would ask the question, why aren't seatbelts on all school buses? And the idea of compartmentalization over the years has been that the high back seats and the extra padding on the seats prevents injury during most of our crashes. Obviously, folks have seen videos that show rollover crashes and kids flying through the air, and that's what seatbelts are intended to actually have a better impact on. Although I'm glad you mentioned the fact that it does improve our discipline as well, which it leads into a conversation about discipline. I want to make sure that people know about our discipline rubric, our discipline guidelines. Talk about the process we use for drivers turning in students when they misbehave on the bus, what that looks like, and what we expect out of our administrators when responding to that information.
Each of our drivers receive discipline forms at the beginning of the school year and throughout the year as they need them. They fill those out according to what issue they may have with a student. They are not turned in directly to the school AP or principal. They are turned into our office, our transportation offices. One of our managers will send those to the AP or principal. That way we have a log of how many forms we turn in, how many students have issues, so that we can meet throughout the school year to try to resolve those issues and keep that child on the bus.
And that's really a goal of transportation, is to keep the child on the bus. However, we do need support from schools in supporting our drivers when they have an issue on the bus, particularly if it's a safety-related issue that jeopardizes the safety not only of the driver but the other students on the bus. We really need support in that area this year to help out with the progressive discipline and making sure that our buses are safe on the road. And one of the things about keeping drivers and retaining drivers is good support from our schools. That's something we heard very loud and clear at the end of the year in our back-to-school closeout meetings for our drivers, is that they're a little disappointed that they've not gotten maybe some support or the level of support they would expect from our schools. So what we'd ask our schools to do going back to school this year, make sure you meet with every driver. Have a conversation with your drivers before the students come back. We'll do dry runs leading up to school, and it's a perfect time to invite your drivers in to have a conversation with them about discipline, what your expectations are as an administrator, principal, assistant principal at that campus. I just think it's very important to have that conversation with them so that they feel like they have support from the administration.
That's correct. And even if the schools would call, the principals or APs would give us a call. If they can't set up a meeting during the dry runs, we'll be glad to set that up the first week of school. They can stay at the school after their run or come back after their end of their morning, and we'll be glad to have them meet with you.
Sounds good. And of course, we use cameras a lot as well. And cameras have been a great addition to our school bus fleet. Every bus has a camera. They do have to be replaced every so often to ensure they're all working. Currently, we have a pretty good handle on the status of our cameras, and all of them are in working order. We do have some that are aging, so one of the things we don't like to do when an administrator calls us and asks for our camera footage is say that the camera wasn't working. So we work very hard to make sure we do have cameras that are in operable condition. However, they're all mechanical, so there are times when the older cameras may stop working for whatever reason, and we try our best to keep everything at 100%, but it's just not possible to do that on a regular basis. How long do we keep camera footage, and what does that process look like for the schools accessing camera footage?
I believe it was 2 years ago, we implemented having a particular drive where we hold all video. It's called the V drive. If your school AP or principal or person that you've designated does not have access to that, simply ask your IT person at your school to help access that. The video is downloaded per school, so only your school would be able to view that or view just your school. If you have issues with viewing it, just simply call our offices. We'll be glad to help you. We have different camera systems, so therefore some of that viewing is a little bit different. And again, we'll be glad to help you with that. We do have those videos will stay on file for 365 days. After 365 days, they will delete. So anything that we need to save or you would like for us to save that may be a potential for litigation or use at a later time, we can hold that in a separate file.
We get the question sometimes from administrators about whether or not parents can view video of their child on a bus, and particularly when there are other students in that video. For example, there may have been an altercation between students and the parent wants to see what happened. How is that treated when you get that request? What do we have to do to make sure we're following all the rules about not sharing too much information, but the parents do have a right to view that information, correct?
They do have a right, especially if it's going to turn into a long-term suspension for your child or for their child. They can come out, give us a call. We'll set up a time to meet with you. They can view the video. Of course, no video can be released without a subpoena from a judge.
Let's move on to issues around startup of school, because that's really the crux for this whole video, is to make sure people understand what's important about starting school. One of the things that the whole process with adding transportation for a student starts with Power School. Talk about the process of adding transportation for a student and what that looks like.
Parents will notify their school that their child needs transportation, so therefore their data manager will key in that child needs transportation. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is if a school has 550 students, for instance, 550 students are keyed in as needing transportation, which is a nightmare for us in transportation because we're looking at transporting 550 students, where the truth of that would really be half that number or even less than that. So Power School's information is critical to the number of buses we would assign at a school.
And and getting the information in early.
Early.
We do have the information from last year will carry over to this year.
Yes.
But when you have students transitioning from middle school to high school or from elementary school to middle school, we need to make sure we double check that information. So our Power School data people are critical in making sure that the information is up to date, the addresses are correct, so that we have time during the summer to add those students to transportation.
Absolutely. And one other point in that is I think sometimes parents get a little bit confused about, well, my child needs to go to my mom's house, needs to go to my grandma's house, needs to go to daycare. That's not something that is keyed into Power Schools. That's keyed into what we call Synovia Wherebus, or Every Info, and instead of Power Schools. That way your child will get to the location they need to get to in the afternoon or the morning. So that needs to be done early as well.
So we do honor alternate stops when requested, if possible. And we also have a process for evaluating stops when a parent requests us to evaluate an alternate stop, or maybe they want a house stop, for example. Now,
Right.
several years ago, transportation underwent a monumental effort to reduce the number of overall stops in the district and consolidate those stops into more community-based stops. So we do grant many fewer stops now than we did a number of years ago because of efficiency reasons. And I want to make sure people understand that just because they refer a parent to us to ask for a stop change, it doesn't mean that stop will be granted.
That is correct. There is a process, it's called the appeals process. Parent would write a letter requesting whether it be a house stop or a closer corner stop. One of our team will go out, take a look at the location they're requesting, take a look at the location they're currently assigned to, and actually get back with the parent to either approve or deny that request.
So when we finalize the arrangements for transportation, we've got the routes run, our folks are going to go out and do a dry run, open house comes up, and that's the time of year that we like to try to share as much information as we can. Of course, parents can go online and check their stops online, and they can do that about a week before school starts. They can do it pretty much any time during the summer, but the information could change.
Yes.
So we encourage parents to go online about a week before.
About a week before. We're working on routes throughout the summer and up to the first day of school and even into the school start. But the most correct information would be a week prior to school.
And so we do encourage our schools to print bus passes. Talk about what that needs to look like at the school level.
Bus passes are printed from every info. Of course, your AP or principal, whom you have a designated, would print those. It's best to print those per grade so that they can be given out at open house, either at the, when they go into the classroom to meet their teacher, they can give them out at that point. It's easier that way instead of piling them up in one stack and us trying to give them out to students as they walk by. So if you would print your boarding passes, each child who comes to home base or comes in for open house would get those bus passes and have them for the first day of school.
And so what about transportation going out to open houses? I mean, we have a limited staff.
We do.
So we try to send our folks out to as many open houses as we can, but we would focus on new administrators who had maybe not had or new at their school or have transportation for the first time. That way we can help them the most. The veteran people pretty much know this information already.
Yes, they do. And we'll be glad to come out and help if we can, but it just seems that everyone has open house the same day. It's 2 days every year, and of course, with a limited staff, we can't be at every open house because most of them are at the same time. If you have issues or concerns with printing boarding passes, we'll be glad to come out during the summer, show you how you can do that, so that information would be there for you. Any information you need as far as a street listing or a stop listing, we'll be glad to print that as well. That's beyond a boarding pass. It actually has student's name of every student in your school in alphabetical order. That way you can post it as well for open house. Even if we can't be there, that information would be there.
So I'll call this a transportation station because I would encourage every school to have a station in their school when people come for open house that they have information available for transportation. That would include a list of stops by bus number.
Yes, and it's been my experience in going to open houses. There is a station for transportation. We're there to support any questions that they may have about, I don't see my child on the list. That could be anywhere from a child not being keyed in as needing transportation to a child that's out of district. So that's why we try to come to open houses, but if we can't, of course, that listing is provided along with stop information.
We'd also ask an open house for our schools to print the back pages of the transportation guide for administrators because that information has a one-page summary of what parents need to know and what students need to know about the bus. So it'd be great, such things as be at the bus stop 10 minutes before the bus arrives. It gives them safety rules. It gives them things they should and should not do in riding the bus. So we definitely would encourage that to be part of open house as well.
Absolutely, and I have had questions about that of how do we get that information? Where does that information come from? And that information is not on the website, but it is on the administrator's guide. So if that was made available, that would be great for the parents.
So it is on the employee portal. Much of the information we talked about during today's presentation is on the employee portal, and we've just updated the transportation information just this week to make sure it is ready for 2017-18. And there's actually a transportation guide, what administrators need to know, is actually on that website, on that site as well, and that will review many of the things we're talking about today, so that it becomes like a checklist.
Yes.
for when school starts. And it's a really good thing to use for school startups so that everybody's aware of what to do when we start school.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've gotten to a point where now we've had open house and we have the first day of school. Talk about some of the issues with first day of school and what needs to happen, particularly with young students, and tagging those students and making sure when they arrive at school, how we're going to get them back on the bus in the afternoon. What happens with those kids that maybe didn't indicate that they were going to be riding the bus, but they come out in the afternoon and they tug on that shirt sleeve of the assistant principal and say, hey, I need a ride home. Talk about those couple of instances and what our expectation is in dealing with those.
That is a challenge, and of course, you know, the first week or two of school, buses will be a little off schedule, you know, because we're running the routes per each stop. Some of those stops, the children will not ride. And of course, with your younger students, K through 3, cannot be let off the bus without a parent present, or shouldn't board a bus without a parent present. And that's a challenge as well. When a bus pulls up, no one's there. Of course, we have to make phone calls at that point to try to get the child home or back to the school. So your K through 3 kids should be tagged with their name, their phone number, and an address as well. Even if we are located at a corner where they get on and off at, we may be able to make contact with the parent at the house. So it's important that information be on those children. And one of the biggest, I believe, challenges is those parents who drop children off the first few weeks of school and they don't ride the bus and then all of a sudden they ride. Or like you said, they're out there that afternoon and need a ride home. If the APs or principals could call us during the day and say, I have a child, didn't ride the bus, we'll be glad to look that child up, find out where they go so that you can tag them correctly. Even last minute at the bus lot, give us a call.
And I really want to emphasize the K-3 rule. That's a rule Durham Public Schools have. It's not a law, but Durham Public Schools has traditionally felt like protecting the safety of those K-3 students was a priority for us. And
Yes.
so we have a rule for our bus drivers. They are not allowed to put off kids by themselves. There are some times when kids will get off in a group, and we're not as stringent on that particular requirement because they're getting off with a group of other students. But when they get off by themselves, we do have a requirement that an adult or an older sibling be present, 4th grade or higher, to be able to work with that student to make sure they're not lost or not wandering, they get to where they need to go.
Correct. I mean, this comes up during the school year as well, especially if there's a sibling that's a 4th grader or a 5th grader or older. There's times that older student will not ride. So that leaves your K through 3 student without someone walking them home. So it's important that the parent notify someone to be at that stop location. Or you can give written consent. If a parent gives written consent to let their child off without an adult present, we will let that child off.
And of course, use of the Here Comes the Bus app is a good thing for all ages, but particularly for elementary student parents because they have access to where the bus is, what time it should be at the stop, and actually what time it does arrive at the stop. So they can track that on their smartphone and or on a computer if they want to, and it will send them notifications of when it's within a certain distance of the stop location.
Correct. The parent can set that radius as far out or as close into their stop location as they'd like. We also have the capability of pushing out a notification to parents if a bus is delayed due to a breakdown.
And that's a really neat feature, and it's been very successful. We just had a survey results come back from the use of this application, and the survey results were very favorable from parents. It's not perfect. We do have a glitch or two every once in a while with substitute buses and that kind of thing, but we think it really does solve a lot of our issues when it comes to communicating with parents about where buses are and the arrival times and that sort of thing. We'll transition a bit to bell schedules. There are no bell schedule changes scheduled for the 2017-18 school year. Just so folks will understand, there is a survey ongoing that will be completed this summer about bell schedules, and the board will be presented information about bell schedules in the fall of the year, and any changes recommended by the board then would take place in the 2018-19 school year if there are any. There may not be any. We're going to try to look at not only survey results, but also achievement for high schools, that sort of thing, to see if we can link all that together. And just want to make sure people knew that no bell schedules are planned for the 2017-18 school year. Anything else that you can think of that might be important for our audience to know?
Field trips. That's something that
Yeah,
we
let's talk about field trips for a second.
One of the biggest challenges we face with field trips is the time that's allotted for those trips, 9:30 to 1:30. We get a lot of calls, well, my school don't let out till 3, or my school don't let out till 4. Why can't my my trip go till, 4 o'clock. Our buses are not paired, single-tiered with one school. They're paired, some are doubles, some are triples. You have double runs, so the time schedules, the bell schedules will not allow that. When we have schools letting out at 2:15, our buses must be back on campuses by 1:30, not leaving Raleigh, and coming back. We can't simply do that. We've had several cases where students were a half an hour late getting home due to late arrivals back from field trips.
So it'd be important for our administrators to communicate with their staff, their teachers, and the folks taking the trips, that we're not trying to be mean-spirited about
Right.
field trips.
Right.
But we do have an operational schedule to keep, and if they're back later than the prescribed time, it's really affecting other schools.
It is, and sometimes when a school has a trip that's for their school and their driver's driving for their school, they want that driver there because, we can get back at this time. It doesn't, sometimes doesn't mean that. That driver may have another school to go to prior to your school. And I think that's where the biggest misconception is. I believe the APs and principals are well aware of it. I think sometimes the teachers are not quite aware that that's the case, and they, if they would just convey that to them, I think it would make it a little bit smoother.
Outstanding. I think in closing, we will point back to our employee portal, which is where most of our transportation information is. There's information out there about accident investigation and how to conduct accident investigation, what administrators need to do. There's an actual page for principals to understand what their role is for an accident. And that needs to be reviewed and make sure you have that handy, because if we have a serious accident, we're going to need them on the scene. And they're going to need to have a roster of students and help account for the students and work with parents in communication, that sort of thing. So that's very important. I would once again remind folks about the bus conduct rubric. We have updated that for the seatbelt buses. We're only getting 9 buses this year, so every campus will not be affected by seatbelts. But for those few campuses that are affected, then we'll obviously need to communicate with them about that. And I guess the back-to-school information is just really important. That can be found on this particular employee portal as well. So, Tim, thank you for coming on with us this morning and having lots of great information to share with our folks. We're hoping that these types of videos can lay the groundwork for the folks that need the information out there in the field. And certainly if you have questions, you can call your contact. Again, on the employee portal, there is a whom to call listing. Every school is assigned a transportation office to work with during the school year. So please look at the whom to call listing. If you have questions about who to call, then it'll be very defined on that, and that is updated for 2017-18.
And thank you for having me.
Once again, thank you very much for your attendance and for your attention, and we'll catch you next time.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks.